Well, hi everyone. My name is Tamar Makov. I'm an assistant professor at Ben Gurion University in Israel. And today it is my great pleasure to introduce our first keynote speaker of this conference, which is Professor Sunstein. He is an author and a professor at the Harvard Law School, where he's the founder and director of the program in behavioral economics and public policy. He's also working with the World Health Organization, and he's a counselor at the Department of Homeland Security in the US. Professor Sunstein is the author of numerous papers and dozens of books, including the 2008 New York Times bestseller, Nudge, Improving Decisions About Health, Wealth, and Happiness, which he wrote along with Richard Thaler. And he has also written lots of papers about how nudge can be used to promote more environmental or pro-environmental behavior. He's the recipient of the 2018 Hallberg Prize, often described as the equivalent of the Nobel Prize in Law and Humanities. And Professor Sunstein, again, we're absolutely delighted to have you here today with us. Thank you so much for waking up so early in the morning, joining us from the East Coast. So please give a warm welcome of applause or whatever the Zoom era virtual equivalent would be to Professor Sunstein. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It's a thrill and an honor to be here. I think the Zoom equivalent to applause might be thumbs up, I think, or not turning off the Zoom camera. That's the equivalent of applause. So I'm very grateful to be here. The topic is extraordinarily important. My particular focus is going to be on nudging green, and I'm going to say a little bit that is in practice and in research findings that's kind of part of the world of green nudging today. And I'm going to say a bit about frontiers issues, that is, topics that we're just glimpsing, on which we have some research and some practice, but I'm hopeful in the next decade or quarter century they will become understood and routinized, and we'll be able to do much better than we now are. I'm going to organize these remarks into four parts. First, I'm going to speak about the most relevant findings in behavioral science and talk a little bit about nudging in the context of environmental protection and greenness. Then I'm going to introduce a framework, which I regret to say has an acronym. The framework is called FEAST, and each of the letters in the word feast has a referent, which is a word. I won't spoil the surprise quite yet, that's coming. Then improbably and somewhat recklessly, I'm going to try to draw some lessons from vaccine hesitancy for our topic today. And the reason I'm doing that somewhat reckless thing is that in the domain of vaccine hesitancy, we have a lot of research findings that are extremely pertinent to unanswered questions with respect to the environment and greenness. And I'm going to try to draw some lessons from that. And then fourth and finally, I'm going to introduce a new concept, sludge. It should be a familiar word, sludge, and I hope the novelty will also be intuitive. Think of gooey stuff that is under your feet and that you're trying to navigate as you get to a place that is your preferred destination. But the gooey stuff, the sludge, is making that hard for you. And I'm going to suggest, with respect to our topic today and all matters environmental, sludge can be a problem and sludge reduction can be a solution. Okay, part one of four, behavioral biases. With respect to environmental matters in particular, though life in general, it's not correct to say that human beings are irrational. That would be a very unkind thing and also false. It is correct, which is to say it's both true and not unkind, that people are imperfect choosers. Especially in unfamiliar settings or settings that call up new issues that they're not used to addressing. With respect to imperfection of choosing, there are 6 problems that Homo sapiens faces. First, we tend to be present biased. We think about today and tomorrow and not the long term. This is a robust research finding. It bears on environmental protection in general. It bears on climate change in particular, but it affects every choice where the short-term benefits are high, the short-term costs are low, the long-term costs are high, and the long-term benefits might be low. A way to think of present bias is to understand human beings as living in a place. It could be Ireland, it could be Germany, and there's another place, another nation called Laterland, and they're not sure they're ever going to visit. The lack of salience of the long term can be an obstacle to, let's say, individually optimal choices and also socially optimal choices. The second of the behavioral findings is that human beings suffer or benefit from inertia. Our book, Nudge, has only one original heuristic. We call it the yeah, whatever heuristic, which means that in the face of a choice, if people are doing something already and asked to do something different, it might take an intervention of some kind to get them to do the different thing. That inertia is often a powerful force, and one reason is that changing from the status quo takes cognitive effort. It might take emotional effort also, and effortful activity is something in which human beings are sometimes reluctant to engage. The third behavioral finding that's environmentally pertinent is unrealistic optimism. We know from our lives, I think, that if we believe a project will be completed in 2 weeks, chances are it will take 3 if we're lucky. It's called the planning fallacy. We know that 90% of drivers think that they're safer than the average driver. We know in one study, I regret to report, that 94% of university professors think they're better than the average university professor. And we know that 100% of people, more or less, think that their sense of humor is better than the average sense of humor. That's because each of us knows what's actually funny. Unrealistic optimism can be beneficial to health and well-being. It can help us complete our tasks eventually, but it can be a problem with respect to environmental challenges because it can make us think that the likelihood that they will be solved or that a solution will be magically delivered is higher than it actually is. The fourth of our 6 findings is the availability heuristic. This may be familiar to many of you. In situations in which something, let's say a terrorist attack, is highly salient, people will think that the probability that it will occur is really high. In situations in which people don't have cognitively available an incident or event, let's call it a pandemic, when was one of those? 100 years ago? In a situation like that, people might think the probability of a pandemic is vanishingly small. The fact that people tend not to run numbers or think statistically, but to ask what is available cognitively tends to lead to inaccurate risk perceptions. The fifth of the 6 findings, and I'm going to recapitulate when I'm done, is called loss aversion. And this is environmentally particularly relevant, and it can be a serious challenge. If people dislike losses, on average, they dislike losses about twice as much as they like corresponding gains. If you learn you're going to win a certain amount of money by virtue of your willingness to listen to this keynote, you'll probably be happy, I hope. It's not true, I regret to say. But if you learn that you're going to lose a certain amount of money by virtue of your willingness to endure this lecture, you would be really, really sad, probably twice as sad as you'd be happy if you learned you'd get the same amount of money. Loss aversion may also have evolutionary foundations. If you are in a hunter-gatherer society and you're at the edge of subsistence, if you lose a little bit, you're dead. If you gain a little bit, you're better off, but it's not a life or death situation often. In any case, loss aversion can be enlisted with respect to environmental choices. If people are told they'll get a certain amount of money if they bring their own bag to a store and they don't ask for a plastic bag, the behavioral effect is essentially zero. It's very small. If people are told that if they want to use a plastic bag at a convenience store, they'll have to pay a little bit of money, the effect is very significant. Even if we're just speaking about an essentially nominal fee, that's usable. It suggests that characterizing something as a loss or actually imposing a loss, even if it's a small one, triggers the human mind. This can be a challenge for carbon taxes, as we saw not long ago in France. Even if the magnitude is relatively low, a loss gets people's attention. That can be a challenge, but it's also an opportunity. The sixth of the environmentally relevant behavioral findings is the most recent, and that has to do with cognitive scarcity. And the basic idea is that if you are hungry, poor, busy, or lonely, you are focused on food, time, money, or friends, which means the amount of bandwidth that you have to attend to other things is really limited, which means that anything that taxes your bandwidth in the environmental domain might turn out to be less effective than one thinks. And anything that frees up your bandwidth will be extremely welcome and more likely to be effective. Okay, we now have our 6 findings. I hope they're relatively intuitive. These are the environmental champions, I think, of behavioral science. And I don't have an acronym for them, blessedly. They are present bias, inertia, optimism, the availability heuristic, loss aversion, and scarcity. It's basically PORS. It's almost priors, but it's not quite priors. If we reorder them, it might be a little close to priors, but the L confounds that. Okay, in the face of these behavioral findings for environmental protection and products, lifelines, and lifetimes, we should distinguish between 2 different kinds of interventions. Some preserve freedom of choice and some don't. Those that preserve freedom of choice are nudges. They can be less effective than those that eliminate freedom of choice, but they're more friendly than those that eliminate freedom of choice. Nudges are like GPS devices. In fact, GPS devices are nudges. They tell people how to get to their own preferred destination, but they enable people to say, no, I don't want to, if you don't like that annoying voice. Some nudges are architectural and some are educative. This is a very relevant distinction for our topic today. So choice-preserving interventions fall in these 2 categories. An educative intervention is very straightforward, a reminder, a warning, a bit of information about, let's say, the environmental impact of automobiles or refrigerators, something like that can be a nudge. Architectural interventions, by contrast, are those that don't necessarily educate anyone, but change the environment so as to give, let's say, the preferred choice a little bit of help. An example would be automatic enrollment in some kind of plan, subject to opt-out. That typically has a much larger effect than an opt-in design. I'm going to get to details in a moment. Another would be a store that has certain products up front and other products maybe in the back. That is an architectural design that may or may not be educative. And the standard finding is that architectural nudges tend to be more effective than educative nudges. I'm phrasing this very cautiously because educative nudges can have a significant impact, but architectural ones seem to work better. If we want to have some understanding of when they work and why they work, we'd want to bring them, that is architectural and educative interventions, into contact with the 6 behavioral findings with which I started. If people suffer or benefit from inertia, an architectural intervention might mean that inertia is on the side of greenness, for example. Example to come. If people are focused on today and not the long term, an educative intervention that focuses them on their future selves or their children or grandchildren might be effective in overcoming present bias. If people suffer from cognitive scarcity, meaning they're really busy or they're poor or they're focused elsewhere, their attention just isn't on this, an architectural intervention that shows you, let's say, green products when you enter a store can trigger attention immediately and not force the cognitive effort that would be required for people to go elsewhere. Okay, that's part 1, done. Behavioral findings and behaviorally informed interventions. Maybe we'll call this a little book, and that was chapter 1. Here's chapter 2. The chapters are going to get increasingly short. Chapter 2 is called FEAST. That's the acronym I promised. And this is very much at work in Europe in both private and public institutions. And its effort to distill with a lamentably cute acronym a several decade research project on behavior change. I think we're going to keep the F until the end and talk about the EAST framework, which comes from the United Kingdom's Behavioral Insights team, and explore the 4 ingredients. E is the Olympic gold medal winner in the EAST framework, and it refers to easy. And the idea is that often we think when we want to change behavior, what can we do to change it, or how can we push people to get them to behave a bit differently, whether they are households or small businesses or large ones. The E for easy suggests it's often smarter to ask, why aren't people doing it anyway? And to remove the obstacle, to ask, how can we make it easy and remove the obstacle? Example, there's a recent finding in Switzerland that as part of their climate change and environmental initiative, they have promoted automatic enrollment in green energy. The result has been spectacular. Households are staying with green energy, even in circumstances in which non-green energy is more expensive. There is a massive increase in use of green energy in Switzerland, even though among households it's more expensive and it's easy to switch if you don't like the money. Small and medium-sized businesses, maybe more surprisingly, are almost as massively affected as households. If they are automatically enrolled in green energy, even though, again, it's more expensive. Most startlingly, large companies, which are very focused on profits, they also don't switch much. They stay green because they've been automatically rendered green energy users. It's not punished if they switch. It's not hard to switch, but the easiest thing is to stick with the status quo, which is green. And that's what households, small, medium-sized, and large businesses in Switzerland have done. In Germany, something similar has happened where both private and public institutions have promoted automatic enrollment in green energy. And the result has been all over Germany to increase enrollment in green energy. That automaticity is the extreme end of easiness, but there are other ways to make things easy by making it simple and not costly and not time-consuming for people to do the greener thing. So proposition number 1 is that the EAST framework's first letter, the E, is a endlessly usable tool for nudging green. The A in the EAST framework is for attractive. And the basic idea here is if a choice is attractive and pleasant, it is more likely to change behavior than if it is bland or boring. We know that calorie labels and the green equivalents are sometimes not as effective as is hoped. There's evidence suggesting that a traffic lights approach, red, yellow, and green, last I checked, is more effective. It's more attractive than something that is dry and statistical. We know that if a behavior is believed to be consistent with majority practice or the social norm, then we might have something like a self-fulfilling prophecy. This is a distinctive kind of educative nudge that informs people of what most people are doing, and that can drive up the number of people who are doing the thing that most people are doing. There's terrific recent evidence, particularly relevant to our topic today, that if people think that there is a dynamic or emerging norm, that people are increasingly doing X or Y or Z, then people are more likely to do it. Indeed, the evidence suggests the possibility that information about the emerging or dynamic norm is more effective than information about the majority norm. So long as it's true, don't lie to people. That can be a moral violation, it typically is, and counterproductive, it frequently is. But if it's true that people are increasingly doing something that is in the domain of sustainability or greenness, then people will think, I want to do that too. It's not clear exactly why. One reason might be that people don't want to be on the wrong side of history. Another reason people might think that what people are increasingly doing is the right thing to do. In the EAST framework, the last letter, T, stands for timely. And the basic idea is very straightforward, which is if you give people information at the time when they're making choices, it can be much more effective than if you give it to them at a time when they're focused on other things. Focus for a moment, if you would, on scarcity and on inertia. If given people's limited bandwidth, you tell people something about environmental protection at a time when they're thinking about money or about sports, it might be that it's a pretty useless enterprise. If you tell it to them at exactly the time when they're about to make the choice or the day before, it can be extremely effective. Okay, I said that this is the FEAST framework, not the EAST framework, and I'm going to make true on that promise. F stands for fun. And we are seeing increasingly from research, as well as from practice by people whose economic interest requires sensible practice, that fun is often a secret ingredient in promoting environmental improvement or behavior change. Here are two examples, one from the environmental area, one broader. There's data suggesting that if you tell people to consume vegetables because they are good for you and healthier, you will get a significant increase in consumption of vegetables if your statement is credible, maybe on the order of 14%, according to one study. But if you give people a sense that the vegetables are delicious and really fun to eat, the increase is more significant, maybe on the order of 27% in one study. This is only a single data point, but it's suggestive that as between two ways of changing behavior, one that signals earnestness and social contribution, and another which makes people smile and maybe laugh a little bit, the latter can be more effective. Also from the environmental area is a practice by Amazon, which sells electric razors, I am here to report, in what's called frustration-free packaging. Because I buy electric razors and don't like a lot of frustration-creating packaging, I have chosen with delight frustration-free packaging. Having done that on several occasions, I tried to learn what Amazon is actually doing with this. Is this a marketing device? Is it that they think they can get more sales? The answer must be yes, but exactly what's at work. If you look behind the scenes, and this isn't private data, it's available, frustration-free packaging is environmentally preferred packaging. It's green packaging, meaning no plastics, no wires, less solid waste. Basically, it's environmentally much better. But they don't sell it as green packaging. They sell it as frustration-free packaging, which is fun, and they kind of know what they're doing, I think, with respect to sales for sure. The non-environmental example is full of implications. It is a health example, broadly speaking. That is, in some European countries, Pepsi has marketed its diet drink as Diet Pepsi. Pretty straightforward. In other countries, Pepsi has marketed its diet drink as Pepsi Max. A little less straightforward. There's suggestive data suggesting that while Diet Pepsi does okay, Pepsi Max does much better. And the reason isn't, I don't think, that Pepsi Max is infinitely more delicious. It's that Pepsi Max is a fun term. Diet Pepsi is a little bit of a downer. It's a little bit of a, I'm drinking it, I'm not going to gain weight as much. That's probably good. Whereas with Pepsi Max, the idea is max, delicious, great flavor. And people also think at the same time, I'm not gaining as much weight and I'm not having sugar. The basic idea is in the area of concern for those who are focused on an assortment of environmental issues. The Pepsi Max frustration-free packaging idea has general resonance. It's worth serious consideration in lieu of or in addition to something that triggers people's conscience and makes them think that it's the right thing to do. Okay, I threatened that I would say in chapter 3 something about vaccine hesitancy and lessons from that for nudging green, and I'm going to make good on that threat. Okay, there are 3 simple lessons from about 3 decades of work on vaccine hesitancy. Lesson 1, inconvenience is a real problem. The basic idea is that when people aren't getting vaccinated, often the reason is it's not easy, meaning they have to figure out where to go, or it's far to get there, or it's not a good experience, or it takes a long time. At the World Health Organization, where I'm a chair of a technical advisory group, some of the specialists say that the best thing you can do to promote vaccine acceptance and uptake for a large part of the population is eliminate inconvenience. And that has a lesson for nudging green. It's connected with the E in the FEAST framework. Second thing we know from vaccine hesitancy is that there's a large number of people who are complacent. And I hope you're seeing the environmental analog. It's not complicated. Where a large number of people are thinking, with respect to any number of things for which they might get vaccinated, the one is most salient today, I'm healthy, I'm young, I've been sick before, it's okay, I don't want to bother. And there's something to do with respect to complacency also. In fact, there are 2 things to do. One is to suggest that you may be right about yourself, but there are other people who are at risk because of your choices. That's to suggest the social impact and not the individual impact. And there's data suggesting for some part of the complacent population, not those who are struggling with inconvenience, complacency can be overcome in that way. Also, there's a way of overcoming complacency that goes directly at it by suggesting that you're more at risk than you think. And sometimes that is more effective than social. And in the environmental context, if people think that they personally are at risk or their families at risk, then that can be effective. The third part of the vaccine hesitant group are not the people who are responding to inconvenience, not the people who are complacent, but are mistrustful. They think that the intended solution, that is putting a shot in your arm, is about money and is risky and is dangerous and is not about anything good. Sad to report that Eric Clapton, probably the greatest guitarist of all time, give or take a Jimi Hendrix. Do you all know that in London a number of years ago, there was graffiti all over saying Eric Clapton is God? Eric Clapton is not God, but he's really a genius at guitar. He has been in this third category of late, talking about how the vaccine has bad side effects. It's not a good idea to get it. Okay, and we can think of environmental analogs there too. People who think that, let's say, environmentally preferred approaches are really expensive, that they're going to cause unemployment, et cetera. Data is suggestive of, this is my personally favorite behavioral finding in the last 5 years, suggests a phenomenon called solution aversion. That if people think that the solution to an environmental problem is more regulation or more taxes, they're likely to deny the existence of the environmental problem. Their judgment about the fact is determined by their evaluation of the solution. If they think that the solution to an environmental problem is more jobs, more entrepreneurship, more creativity, more economic growth, then they're more likely to nod and say, yes, I think climate change really is a problem, which is to suggest that their factual judgment is mediated by their belief of what follows from that factual judgment. That's not, I think, counterintuitive. If your doctor tells you you have a disease, you're going to die in a month, you might say, I don't believe that for a minute. But if your doctor tells you you have a disease, there are 10 things you can do that'll give you a long life, you might say, okay, I believe that doctor. All right, for the Eric Clapton mistrustful people, the best thing to do is to get credible validators. That is, people who have the same demographic characteristics or the same credibility within the relevant community as the people who are mistrustful. Jimi Hendrix isn't with us to counter Eric Clapton. Paul McCartney might not have quite the street cred, but if we can get Drake or Kanye West maybe saying, please get vaccinated, that might go some way. These are a little bit maybe frivolous examples, but in the context of environmental resistance, that is resistance to a plan of action, to address the mistrustful, to meet them where they are, is a path forward. Okay, chapter 4, and finally, sludge. Sludge consists of frictions that prevent people from going in the preferred direction. It might be the individually preferred direction, but they just don't know how to get there, or it might be the socially preferred direction, and there are obstacles in their way. When you think of sludge, think literally of information, of time, of money, of paperwork, of administrative burdens, of multiple things that we all face when we're dealing with private and public institutions. For green options, often sludge is a serious problem. Even for purely rational actors who are weighing costs and benefits, sludge may be prohibitive. For human beings who aren't perfectly rational, present bias, procrastination, and scarcity can be particular obstacles to the navigation of sludge. With respect to all things green, we need a kind of war on sludge so that what's separating our fellow citizens from environmentally preferred choices is minimally burdensome to navigate. It's not like a wall. Okay, that's short, chapter 4. It's almost like an epilogue. I am done. I'm not going to give you sludge. I'm going to thank you for your attention and say that there's a world of opportunity for here. And if you remember anything from these remarks, I hope it's that for boundedly rational people, not irrational people, boundedly rational people, the best thing we can do is to simplify their choices so that the environmentally preferred one is the easier one. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Thank you. That was fascinating. I kept writing down notes to share with my students later as well. And we have a couple of really interesting questions that came up in the Q&A. So I'm just going to read from my screen. So Elizabeth, this is one by Elizabeth Cooper. And she asks, these are great insights on achieving behavior change from a policy level, so a top-down. But are there also key ideas on perhaps how individuals can nudge upwards, meaning how we can nudge policymakers to, take action on the things that we care about, perhaps?
Absolutely. So I'm thinking just of analogies from history. So the Montreal Protocol, which has done a great deal to combat destruction of the ozone layer, had a large bottom-up feature where individuals voiced concern and explained that there are things that can be done that aren't terribly burdensome or costly to do, such as by buying products that don't contain chlorofluorocarbons. And a lot of the work in producing the Montreal Protocol was produced by ordinary consumers who stopped buying the relevant products. And then companies started developing ozone layer friendly, so to speak, products. There were safe substitutes. And then the company saw a profit opportunity and started saying to policymakers, both consumers and activists and companies were all saying, be aggressive on ozone depleting substances. And the companies, because they'd been spurred by consumers, were promoting environmental regulation. And we see that in many areas where there are successes, where there's a bottom-up drive and then a company level response, and then policymakers aren't stopped by the companies from moving in the environmentally preferred direction. They are spurred by the companies.
Fascinating, thanks. So another related one from Tim Cooper. So this conference is all about product lifetimes and the environmental implications. So Tim asks, how might the nudge theory be used to address planned obsolescence? So this idea that companies intentionally limit the lifespan of products.
Okay, great. So I'm not sure how many of you remember this, but there was a time when light bulb jokes were very popular and they were not funny. It would be like, how many football players does it take to change a light bulb? Or how many lawyers does it take to change a light bulb? There was one that was funny, I think. It was, how many psychiatrists does it take to change the light bulb? And the answer is one, but the light bulb has to want to change. That's a little bit funny. And it's also profound, and I think it's the answer to the question. So for planned obsolescence of projects, the light bulb has to want to change. Now, why would it want to change? One motivation for planned obsolescence would be economic self-interest. So you might think that planned obsolescence is neutral as a business model, or it's positive, because after obsolescence, there's something new, that's a profit opportunity. The other is conscience. And if people think that the economic consequences aren't terrible, maybe they're a little bit not good, but they're not terrible, but it's the right thing to do, then they might do it. So we're seeing all over the world now, with respect to product lifetimes, forward-leaning companies acting either because they think this is an economic opportunity or because they think that it's morally correct. And sometimes they're meshed. If you're doing something that's morally correct, you might think customers are going to like you and investors are going to like you. Tesla is a case in point.
Okay, thanks. And another one here, more related specifically, is from Colin, our heroic chair. And he asks, when considering the environmental impacts of products, many people are sensitive to waste at the end of life, even though the manufacturing is often more environmentally harmful. He suggests that this is probably due to the availability heuristic, as they see waste, but not the mining. How do we make sure that we focus our efforts not on what's salient, but on what's more important or more meaningful?
That's great. Thank you, Colin. And hi, Colin. And thank you for this, as well as this event, as well as for the question. So here's, I think, a suggestive experiment. People often don't save for retirement because their future self is effectively a stranger.
Hmm.
One intervention that helps, that a lot of companies have used, is they allow you to play a little game where you put yourself in a picture of yourself online, and then they will show you yourself at a later age. It's a little alarming. You can see yourself as an old person. And the finding is that after people play this little game, they're more likely to save for retirement because their future self is themselves. So the suggestion is in this domain to do whatever you can to make highly visible to people what is not visible. Peter Singer did that to great effect in his book Animal Liberation. He made salient what was off screen. So here there can be stories as well as data, and I'd encourage both. Stories often motivate the human mind more than data, but data is what we really need, both.
Yeah, that's a very good point. So I think maybe we have time for one or two more. So let's go with Jessica. Jessica asks, how long lasting are nudges when they actually seek to change behavior rather than, for example, removing barriers to existing behavior like default settings, etc.? So does a lot of the behavior revert?
Okay.
What's the evidence on that?
It's a great question. So, with respect to default rules, which automatically enroll people in something and they have to change it, the effect is long lasting. So, I think I'm subscribing to some magazines that I never read, to which I started subscribing in 1997. And the data from Sweden is very powerfully suggestive that default nudges can be decades long things, and that has implications for automatically green approaches. For information, the data is more mixed. If people are given information, let's say, about their energy use, that may affect them for the month in which they're given the information, but then they forget. So they have to be told repeatedly, the data suggests, but after a year or so, they don't have to be told anymore. So it depends on what kind of nudge we're talking about. The architectural tend to be long lasting by definition. With the educative, it's a more complicated story.
Thank you. So now as the moderator here, I'm going to steal the last 2 minutes and ask one of my own questions. So you speak about a lot of behavioral biases and availability heuristic and so on. Then this piggybacks a little bit on Colin's question, but we know that in environmental sciences, there's often the impacts are of second order impact. So it's not something that's direct, but it's the second order. And other than, I guess, highlighting it with information and stories, like you said before, do you think there is any, I would say, like the easy ways, the fun ways that we can go about it to change either policymakers' minds, since you have lots of experience with policymakers, or the end consumer's mind eventually?
Okay, well, I'll talk about my role as a policymaker under President Obama. What President Obama was always drawn to was an initiative that would have benefits in excess of costs. So if you have a fuel economy rule or any kind of rule, take your pick, if it involves product lifetimes, and the conclusion is the benefits will be twice as high as the costs, then policymakers are going to like it. If they don't see that, then they would have a reason. Maybe it has distributional benefits. Maybe it helps people who are particularly in need of help. Maybe it protects human dignity in some way. Maybe there are non-quantifiable values that it promotes. But policymakers are often drawn to real numbers showing that it's going to be net beneficial. If not that, other policymakers I've known have thought, who likes this? And if the number of people who like it or who can be brought to like it is really high, And if they are people who you wouldn't be expected to like it, but they like it, then policymakers treat that as a heuristic for it being a good idea.
So people liking it. Well, we're exactly on time. So again, I'd like to thank you, and a large round of applause, virtual ones. And I think we're done. And please go to the coffee break that we have and the sessions after this. And thanks again to our speaker joining us from the US. Thanks. It was fascinating for me personally, and I'm sure for everyone. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Tamar. Great to meet you.
Bye.